Peter Jukes, writer, founder of the Byline Times and the Byline Festival. Thank you for taking the time.
Hello, Oli. Lovely to do this in my social isolation.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time. So, Matt Hancock, I think he may have just left the virtual select committee briefing. But in that, he did say that the overall goal of the government in relation to the data and the reporting around coronavirus was to be as transparent as possible. And I just wonder whether you think there has been adequate openness from the government, but also perhaps scrutiny of their response to the pandemic.
Well, two things. I think there are different forces within government, and Matt Hancock, for example, discredited the idea of herd immunity very early on. But we know, and thanks to the Sunday Times, other elements of the government were pushing for this bizarre, unprecedented idea of herd immunity, i.e., 80% of the population getting infected without a vaccine. So I don't think you can talk about the government as completely one thing. But I don't know if your audience have been following the work that Carol Cadwallader has done on Dominic Cummings. I sort of worked with her on that, and Vote Leave. This is a Vote Leave government. Now, what we do know about the Vote Leave group, which includes Cummings, which includes obviously Gove and Johnson, who led that campaign, is they are not transparent. Dominic Cummings, number 10 advisor, chief advisor to the Prime Minister, refused to attend the select committee looking at the overspend of Vote Leave, who's overspent massively in the last few days, illegally, unlawfully, and he's in contempt of Parliament. So transparency is not their middle name. So my fear is we have quite a secretive government, that the data will be manipulated. Well, here's one example, and only recently it's taken us a month to catch up on this. The coronavirus deaths, which we compare our death rate with somewhere like France, for example, our statistics do not include care home deaths. The French do. So at every point we're relying on a government, the whole British idea of transparency and honesty. And my fear is I don't think they're naturally attuned to do that. Then the other problem, as you alert to, the other problem is we have a dysfunctional media system. Now, people think, I stumbled into media, 7 years ago, live tweeting the phone hacking trial, writing a book about Murdoch and then a murder associated with the News of the World, Daniel Morgan. And though I didn't believe this before, and it's not coming from any sort of political bias or any particular kind of framework of ideology, I have noticed we have one of the most bent, partial, dysfunctional media systems in the Western world. I mean, when it comes to the printed press, we have the lowest trust of any nation in Europe, by 50%. It's a far outlier trust. And we have to remember this government is comprised of a punditocracy. It is, what is Johnson's role before he became prime minister? Was he a scientist? Was he a barrister? Was he something really professional? No, he was a columnist. A columnist famously sacked from the Times for lying, and then getting a perch in the Telegraph, writing lies about bendy bananas about Europe as Brussels correspondent. So you have this horrible mismatch of a fairly secretive government and a media ecosystem which, when it comes to the papers, is happy to boost them rather than to hold them to account. And so I think the problem is both the lack of transparency from government and the chaos I can see, and a lot of it's just chaos. Testing, ventilators, PPE, there's a lot of chaos there, and it's partly Whitehall. But, you also have from outside a lack of scrutiny. I mean, it's just, I'm exhausted. Why am I exhausted? Because we've done a mammoth edition of Byline Times, 40 pages, put it to bed over the weekend and designed and everything. I don't want to have to do that. We had a great investigation with Nafis Ahmed into what the SAGE, this special committee said, and herd immunity, and these tapes we got of the government Home Office Deputy Scientific Advisor saying they were going for herd immunity. This shouldn't be the job of a small startup newspaper. Everybody should be able to. There were good, exceptions everywhere. In the BBC, there were good reports. In Channel 4 News and The Guardian. But the general culture is not one where I feel the public have been informed. And here is an example of that. I have a friend in Manchester who was saying, even now, but suddenly 2 weeks ago, Boris says it's all right. I'm going to go out. I'm going to go down the pub and get it. Really, seriously. they saw that first press briefing, it was not challenged. Take it off. Well, that's kick on the chimbers earlier. Was that it's fine. Come out after 7 days after symptoms, start mixing with people. Get it, and then take it on the chin. And they've done that. I've had the coronavirus. I'm pretty sure I had all the symptoms. Were completely compatible. Never had anything like it before. And I self-isolated for 2 weeks after the last symptom. Now, British guidelines, that's World Health Organization guidelines. And it was sad. I didn't see anybody for basically 4 weeks. But the British guidelines come out 1 week after having your first symptom. That's a huge difference. You could still be infected, be transmitting it on. And I'm afraid that, if we're going to have the worst death toll in Europe, which we may have, I really don't want us to have it. I don't want to prove that point by being right at any cost like that. But it will be because of this bad information and lack of information in the general public.
I was going to ask you about sort of whether you thought what you thought were standout moments, events, things that were deserving of scrutiny. But I feel like you've mentioned quite a few there, whether it's herd immunity, things of that nature. But something that I thought was quite striking over the last, I think, day was a New York Times investigation into antibody tests, which is reported to have cost the government $20 million US, and for a series of tests, I think roughly 2 million tests that don't work. I mean, how many errors, how many things like this are you seeing that you think deserve more coverage?
Many. I mean, there's a whole issue about ventilators. There's a whole issue about purchasing PPE, the test, both the antibody and the antigen testing. Look, I mean, part of this is, and my co-founder, Stephen Colgrave, co-founded both the festival and the paper, spent 10 years as a consultant, not a medical consultant, a kind of other kind of consultant in the National Health Service. And there is a problem of procurement in NHS. It's very cumbersome. It's very hierarchical. But you have that initial problem. And then really in a crisis, then we have sort of a donor to Boris Johnson, a major donor doing all the deliveries, so for PPE. And so there is a culture in the Tory party as in power now of a lot of lobbyists. I mean, nearly they're all, if they're not journalists, they're PR by Priti Patel, come background in PR. You have a lot of people, a lot of lobbying organizations associated with this Tufton Street network, which is funded by some tobacco and oil in there. And a lot of people with legs under the table and, so we say, snouts of the trough. It's just how that funding works. The Tory party gets millions, and we calculated this on Byline Times, 75% from hedge funds and city traders, which are only a tiny percentage of the economy. These people don't give away lots of that money to the Tory party for nothing. There is a financial interest in this. And my fear is there will be, because it is not led, because it's economic interests and sort of commercial lobbying, they are all in competition, and you'll have people sort of, grabbing as much as they can and not being organized. There's nothing about Johnson, and which inspires me beyond the sort of Churchillian sort of poetics of the way he talks and moves, that he's a good leader. I mean, he's organized, that, he would say, do this, do this, do this, do this, and let's organize that. Angela Merkel, is a scientist. She gave a brilliant talk about explaining why the transmissibility rate, it's the R rate, is one person infects one person, that's an RO of 1, that if it went to 1.2, 1.1 or 1.2, it would overwhelm German healthcare, their critical care services, by June. Tiny percentage difference in the transmissibility rate in it, the vast national scale could cause massive deaths because the health services can't cope. And you have confidence somebody there understands the problem and then looks at real solutions. I don't have a sense that Johnson and even his cabinet, obviously Whitehall slightly different, understand the problem. But even if they did, do they have the capacity, the wherewithal, the collaborative skills to actually, affect things, to combat? Now, it's not all bad news. Rishi Sunak, for example, I think has done quite a good job. He inspires confidence. Maybe the Treasury is more effective in this. And I do think the problem is this departmental chaos. Dominic Cummings wanted to shake up Whitehall. We knew he had this huge data project, that's a UK DARPA, in which he wanted to sort of use those, I call it Whitehall Analytica, those kind of data things in government. And I think he wanted to shake up Whitehall. And so Whitehall is shaken. Where is the responsibility lying? Is it with Hancock? Is it with number 10 advisors? Is it with the weird behavioral scientists they've chosen? Or is it with the medical care? I think there's a lot of chaos in government anyway, in a cabinet which sort of really relies, if you see them, they are all there because of Johnson. There's very little independent thought.
What's the motive here, Peter? Because is it just an appeal or a belief in sort of libertarian values? I mean, what in your judgment is motivating this thought process, this decision-making process?
Well, it's been like a bit of a thriller. Myself and several other journalists and investigators, were first alerted on the 12th of March to this herd immunity theory, right? Never heard of before without a vaccine. And so it's a good example of where I think it's coming from. So we did a lot of work on this, worked out that there's no such thing as natural herd immunity. It's always talked in terms of vaccine. But imagine there was an actual herd immunity. It would take a decade to get there without overwhelming critical. So we look back to two discoveries, really, one by myself, one by another journalist. Somebody alerted this. Dominic Cummings did write about herd immunity, this amazing paper, 260 pages, about education in 2013, when he was somewhere in a bunker, he retired from government. I don't know what happened. And he talks about evolutionary economics, right? And one of his great heroes, is where somebody invited to talk to his think tank, published a paper, is this guy called Richard Epstein. Worth looking up. He's one of the people who are pushing Trump to do nothing. And he also is this evolutionary economist. And he said, death rates would only be like 2,000. He then revised upwards in America. And there is this group of libertarian thinkers with a smattering of badly understood science around Matt Ridley, evolutionary psychology, the Red Queen, all this stuff that was happening in the early noughties, which kind of looked at male behavior, for example, male sexual behavior, or all in terms of poorly understood evolutionary psychology. And this informs a new kind of laissez-faire libertarianism. Now, so to show you that it has an impact in Johnson, last night, somebody commented on Byline Media, have you seen this speech by Johnson in the 3rd of February this year, 7 weeks before lockdown? And we've just published a piece on it. So Hardeep Matharu, I think you've also spoken to, has just done a quick exclusive on that. So, there was a classic example. It was on daytime TV saying, one theory is take it on the chin, one theory is do a lot, right? And it was going, well, he was just touting theories, full fat weighed in. He didn't mean that. It was just one theory. And it also kicked off. But the take it on the chin theory is the herd immunity. Now, Boris Johnson in February 3rd, at a big speech in Greenwich about Brexit, says this. He's talking about coronavirus, and he uses the analogy of Superman. He says, basically, if you read the piece and read what he said, that one country could defy everybody else and ignore the lockdown, and it would have a huge advantage. He basically talks a Superman theory that Britain would go alone, not lock down, and therefore stop, an economic impact, and actually be ahead of the world because it would have presumably killed a lot of people, but not locked down the economy. That is a smoking gun. That was the thinking at number 10. And we all have to take that into our hearts, because this pandemic, if it shows anything, shows us, forget even the fake science, our values. Now, would you, Oli, take a 25% cut in your salary or lose a parent?
Salary cut, no question.
So, all the economic thinking, all this evolutionary, it misses value. It misses humanity. I mean, our economy has grown 25%. Would you keep your mum or your gran or your granddad and lose a bit of salary? Nobody has a problem with that on a moral level. But that's what we're saying. Lose a gran, lose a mum. And we know it doesn't just affect people. It affects young people. Lose them so that you keep your money. And I think that is a massive revelation. And it's anyway, I mean, it upsets me, the very thought of it, because at a human level, we all know what it means.
So I think there was a moving line in Boris Johnson's first sort of public statement after he was removed from hospital. He said that he owed the NHS his life. And I wonder if you think that there's a valid opportunity here for the Conservative Party to potentially cast itself as the party of the NHS, and if that's a realistic political possibility in our post-coronavirus national politics.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, one of the nurses, he was Polish or Italian, I forget. You know, our health service is overrepresented. If you look at the deaths, and we've compiled them, other people have too, on Byline Times, it's overwhelmingly black. It's like 40%, 50%. Migrated here as doctors, black and Asian minority ethnic. It is very diverse. It represents kind of the best of Britain. And what you do hope is that, like David Cameron, I think David Cameron was genuine about this because he had this severely disabled son who sadly died. He really, did have an amazing encounter with the health service, and these values of life over the economy, I think, were ingrained on him. I think he meant it, whatever he ended up doing, but I think he meant it. The problem with Johnson and Cummings is that if you look at the people around them, people like Daniel Hannan, who close to Cummings, praised his Vote Leave campaign, part of the Vote Leave campaign. Daniel Hannan has said the NHS is a 60-year-old mistake on Fox News when you're looking at Obamacare. And we know what's the most salient, and probably apart from threats of Turkey and Muslims coming over here, what was the most salient and effective Vote Leave slogan beyond Take Back Control? 350 million the NHS a week. Now, it lied about the amount of money we're paying into the EU and the net payments to the EU, and it has no indication. Boris Johnson currently, from 2016, 350 million a week, owes the NHS 50 billion. So here's my problem. They are quite happy to lie. Dominic Cummings, I don't know, but from everything, he hates the BBC. His mate Daniel Hannan doesn't like the NHS. I don't think he believes in it. I think he thinks it's socialism. I don't know that for sure, Dominic, if you want to tell me different. But they have lied, saying they really like the NHS in the past. And so how can we trust this Damascene, this road to a Damascus moment from Johnson, or they say my life will defend the NHS? Because they've lied about it before.
You just don't believe them.
Look, I want to believe. But the job of journalists is not about faith or trust. It's evidence. Actions speak louder than words. What are they actually doing? I mean, it could be. I mean, I do think you've got a point here. Suddenly there's a magic money tree. Suddenly the state intervenes. Libertarianism, it is a kind of not karma. I don't believe in karma. I don't believe in it that way. But it is a living example of the limits of aggressive individualism and libertarianism. There's some things we have to do collectively. And you can't build walls around the virus, or you can by isolation, but you can't sing Rule Britannia to it, as Musa Okwonga says on Byline Times. All this nationalist, populist fervour does not work. And the racism, Islamophobia, all that falls apart when our common humanity is challenged by a new pathogen. And it doesn't care about your class or your race or your religious belief. It's coming for you. And I think that does unite us and our common humanity, because we are incredibly genetically closely related. People go about racism. The ridiculous thing is there's more genetic divergence between you and your sibling than between someone living in the Kalahari and someone living in Siberia, because actually we're incredibly closely related genetically, and there's a lot of individual variation. And this pathogen proves that.
Peter, I think this is a good place to leave it. I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm grateful for you speaking to us. Thank you.
Lovely to talk to you.